She was 52 years old and she had just been left behind. Not with shouting, not with a fight, not even with a final cruel word, just a divorce paper laid flat and squared on the kitchen table, already signed, and a wedding ring set down beside a coffee cup that was still warm. There were $87 left in the account they had shared for 26 years because he had quietly moved the rest somewhere she would never find it. And for 41 years she had believed that her father was a man who had abandoned his family, a silent Basque sheep herder who had turned his back on a wife and a child to go live alone out in the Nevada desert where the road runs straight and empty for 100 miles. But what nobody knew, not the county, not the lawyers, not even Lorna herself, was that behind a wooden key rack in the front office of an abandoned motor court, on the loneliest highway in America, in a hidden compartment that had been waiting in the dark for more than 30 years, was something that would change everything she thought she knew about the man who had given her life. Before we go any further, if you love these stories, the way we love telling them, take 1 second right now to subscribe and tell us down in the comments where in the world you are listening from. We have 12 brand new stories, full quiet road stories just like this one, never released anywhere on YouTube, made only for the people who support this channel directly. You will find the link in the description below. We poured our whole hearts into them, and we made them for the people who actually sit down and listen all the way to the end. Thank you for being one of them. Now let's get back to Lorna. Lorna Aldecoa had spent the better part of her life cleaning up the rooms that other people left behind. She had been born in Reno, Nevada, in a working neighborhood north of the rail yards, the kind of place where the smell of the high desert and the smell of casinos mixed together in the wind at midnight, sage and diesel and cigarette smoke, and something underneath it all that was just the dryness of the land itself. Her father, Bautista Aldecoa, the man everyone called Tista, was a Basque sheep herder who had crossed the ocean from the Pyrenees Mountains when he was 20 years old with a wooden trunk and not one word of English in his mouth. Her mother, Connie, was the daughter of a miner out of Tonopah. They married in the spring, and Lorna was born the following winter, and for the first 11 years of her life, she was the only child of a quiet man and a frightened woman in a small rented house on the edge of a desert city. Lorna remembered very little about her father, and the little she remembered, she had spent 41 years trying not to remember, which is its own kind of holding on. She remembered a pair of large hands, scarred and rope-burned and gentle, that smelled of lanolin from the wool of sheep and of wood smoke from juniper fires. She remembered the way he sat at the head of the supper table and ate slowly and said almost nothing, as though every word cost him something he did not have a great deal of. She remembered him standing at the kitchen window before dawn, a dark shape against the gray light, drinking coffee out of a tin cup and looking out at a horizon that was not there, that was somewhere else, somewhere high and cold and far away. The way a man looks who has spent too many years alone with sheep on the roof of the world and has never quite learned how to come all the way back down. She remembered other small things, the kind of things a child keeps without knowing why. The way he would carry her on his shoulders out into the cold yard on winter nights and point up and name the stars in a language that was not English and was not Spanish, an old language from old mountains, and how she had felt, up there on his shoulders in the dark, that nothing bad could ever reach her. The way he saved string and bent nails and bits of leather in a coffee can, because a man raised poor in the mountains throws nothing away. The way he never once raised his voice, not at her, not at her mother, not at anything. Even when the silence in the house grew so thick you could have cut it and stacked it like cordwood by the door. And she remembered the night he left. She was 11 years old. Her mother stood in the doorway with her arms crossed hard over her chest, and Tista carried the wooden trunk out to an old pickup truck under a sky full of desert stars, and he did not turn around, and he did not look back, and the truck went down the street and turned at the corner and was gone. The next morning her mother told her, in a voice scraped flat and dry, that her father had chosen the desert over his family, and that from that day forward they would not speak of him again. And they did not. For 41 years they did not speak his name. Connie died of cancer when Lorna was 30 years old, and right up to her last breath she never said one more thing about Testa, except for the one sentence Lorna had heard so many times that it had worn a groove into her like water wearing into stone. We do not need a man who chose to leave. Lorna had grown up with that sentence sitting in her chest like a cold stone. She learned not to expect anything from anyone. She learned to do for herself, She quit school at 18 and took a job cleaning rooms at one of the big casino hotels in downtown Reno, and she did that job for 21 years. She pushed a cart loaded with white towels and small soaps down long carpeted hallways. She knocked on doors and called out housekeeping into the silence and let herself into rooms where strangers had spent a single night. She made the beds and wiped the mirrors and gathered up what people left behind. And she learned that people leave a great deal behind in a room they only mean to stay in for one night. Loose coins under the lamp. Letters they could not bring themselves to send, left half-written on hotel stationery. Photographs slid behind the dresser. A child's small sock. A wedding ring at the bottom of the trash can, which she always fished out and turned into the front desk, and which was almost never claimed. Sometimes tears still drying on a pillow, and you could always tell, the rooms where someone had cried alone all night. Lorna gathered all of it, quietly folded the abandoned clothes and bagged the lost things and stripped the beds, and she did not judge a single one of them, because she understood something about people who pass through in the dark and leave a piece of themselves behind. She understood it better than she knew. She had been raised, after all, by the memory of a man who had passed through her own life and left only a coffee can full of bent nails and a single sentence about open doors that she would not understand for 41 years. There was a thing the older women on the housekeeping crew used to say. The ones who had been doing it for 30 years before Lorna ever pushed her first cart. A room tells you the truth about a person faster than the person ever will. Lorna had found that to be true. And she had found that the truth a room told was almost never as ugly as you feared, and almost always sadder. She met Pruitt Hatch when she was 25. He was an electrician for the casino, a man who knew how to make a room laugh, who knew how to make a quiet woman like Lorna feel, for the first time in her life, that she was actually being seen. They married after a year. They bought a small 3-bedroom house on the edge of Sparks. And for 26 years, Lorna did everything a wife is taught she is supposed to do. She cooked and she cleaned, and she kept the house spotless, and she carried the silent half of a marriage, the half nobody thanks you for, the laundry and the bills and the small daily mercies that hold a home together. They never had children. The doctor said it was her, and Pruitt never once let her forget it, although he never once said it out loud. He just let it hang in the air of the house, year after year, like a smell that never quite cleared. Then came the autumn that Lorna turned 52. Pruitt started coming home late. He started leaving his phone face down on the table. He started mentioning a young woman from work, named Shay, who was 29 years old, in the particular way a man talks about a thing he has decided he is owed. Lorna did not ask him anything. She had cleaned enough rooms in her life to know the shape of a thing that is ending. She knew it the way you know weather, the way the light changes, before the storm. So she just kept cooking, and kept cleaning, and kept the house spotless, because that was the only thing she knew how to do while everything else fell down around her. On a Tuesday morning in October, Lorna came home early because the casino had cut her shift. The leaves on the one cottonwood in the yard had gone gold and were letting go, one at a hat tripped down onto the dead grass. She walked into the kitchen, and there it was. The divorce paper, squared on the table, lined up precisely with the edge of the wood, the way a man lines up a thing he has rehearsed, already signed in Pruitt's looping hand, and beside it his wedding ring taken off, set down next to a coffee cup that was still warm to the touch. The warmth of that cup was the cruelest part. He had sat there that morning, drunk his coffee, signed the paper, taken off the ring, and walked out, all of it as ordinary to him as any other Tuesday. There was no note. Pruitt did not need to leave a note. 26 years, and he left her $87 in the shared account, because he had been quietly moving the rest of it out for months, a few hundred at a time, the way you bleed a thing slowly so it does not cry out. The house was in his name. It had always been in his name, and she had never thought to ask why, because back then, she still believed that love was a thing you did not have to put in writing. His lawyer had taken care of everything. The way you take care of a problem you have decided is no longer yours. Lorna stood in the middle of her own kitchen, in the gold October light coming through the window over the sink, with the cold ring in the palm of her hand. She picked up the coffee cup he had left, and she washed it and dried it and put it back in the cupboard, because that was the only thing in the world she knew how to do with her hands at that moment. And her hands needed something to do. And she did not cry. She had learned a long time ago that there are kinds of pain that tears cannot reach, that sit too deep and too cold for water, down where her father had once told her a river person keeps her own banks, although her father had been a mountain man and not a river man, and she did not know where she had gotten that thought, only that it was there, and it held her up. She had 2 weeks to be out of the house. Lorna packed her life into 6 cardboard boxes and a single suitcase. It was not very much for 52 years. She had not understood that until she saw it stacked by the door, 6 boxes and a suitcase, a whole life that fit in the bed of a borrowed truck with room to spare. She rented a room by the week at a rough motel on the east side of Reno, the kind of place where the smell of bleach could not cover the smell of other people's bad luck, where the carpet had been walked thin in a path from the door to the bed, where you could hear everything through the walls and nobody ever knocked to complain, because everybody there was carrying the same kind of quiet. She knew motels. She had cleaned them. It was a strange thing to be on the other side of the door for once, to be the one who left the tears on the pillow instead of the one who found them. She applied for work at 3 other hotels and none of them called her back, because at 52, after 21 years of cleaning rooms, her back had begun to betray her, and people could see it when she walked, the slight favoring of one hip, the careful way she bent. The thing she had given her body to, for 21 years, had used her up and handed her back, and now nobody wanted what was left. She sat on the edge of the bed in that rented room in the evenings and counted what was left, $87. And then she counted it again, as if counting it a second time might change the number. The traffic went by on the highway outside. The neon from the office buzzed against the glass, pink and broken. And for the first time in her entire life, she did not know where she would go in the morning. She held the cold ring and turned it over and over in her fingers, and did not put it down, not because she still wanted it, but because it was the last solid thing in a life that had gone to water, and a person holds on to what is solid. She did not know yet that there is a particular grace that finds people only when they have run out of everything else, that the bottom is sometimes a floor, that you cannot find the door that was waiting for you until you have lost the house you thought you lived in. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, there was a letter. It came from a law office in Austin, Nevada, a town Lorna only vaguely knew as a name somewhere out in the middle of the state, on the long road that crossed it east to west. The letter said that her father, Bautista Aldecoa, had died of heart failure at the age of 83 3 weeks earlier, alone, in an abandoned motor court he had lived in for more than 30 years. And it said that, according to his will, he had left everything he owned to his only daughter, Lorna Aldecoa. Lorna read the letter 3 times. The man who had abandoned her when she was 11, the man her mother had taught her to scrub out of her own heart, had left her something. There had been some mistake, she thought, or it was a cruel joke from a dead man. She called the number on the letter, and a woman's voice, older, slow, careful, answered. The woman's name was Del McGuire, and she was the township clerk for the whole region, and the one who handled the legal paperwork for a place too small to have much of anyone else. She confirmed that all of it was true. The property, Del McGuire said over the phone, was an old motor court called the Wagon Wheel, 6 times west of Austin on Highway 50, out in the Reese River Valley. 8 cabins and an office. Your father lived there since the 70s, and I have to be honest with you, Mrs. Aldecoa. The county already sent an assessor out. The roof is gone on 2 of the cabins, the pipes are cracked, the sign is dead. They valued the whole property at $1. $1 just to have a number on the paper. You can come and claim it, or you can decline it and let the county deal with it. Lorna sat for a long time in the rented room after she hung up. $87 in the account. A husband who had walked out with a woman of 29. A father who had died alone in the desert and left her a thing worth exactly $1. She thought, maybe that was the only thing that fit. A worthless inheritance, left by a man who had been worthless to her for her whole life. But that night, lying in the rented bed with the traffic going by outside and the broken pink neon buzzing against the glass, Lorna remembered the large, scarred hands that smelled of lanolin and juniper smoke. And she remembered a thing she had buried very deep, so deep she had not touched it in 41 years. When she was 10 years old, a year before her father left, he had taken her out in the pickup truck one early morning before her mother was awake, driven her out east of the city into the open desert, and stopped at the side of a long empty road where there was nothing in any direction but sagebrush and sky. He had not said much. Her father never said much. He had only pointed out at the horizon, where the mountains were turning purple and then rose and then gold in the first light of the rising sun, and they had sat there together in the cab of the truck, not talking, watching the day come up over the empty land. And then he had said, in his heavy, slow English, a single thing that she had forgotten for 41 years, that she had not even known she still carried until that moment in the rented room when it rose up in her whole and clear as if he had said it yesterday. Some people never make it to where they are going, he said. Somebody has to leave a door open for them. And then he had started the truck and driven her home. And a year later, he was gone, and she had never understood until now that he had not been talking about strangers on a road. He had been trying to tell her, in the only way a silent man knows how, who he was and what he was about to spend the rest of his life doing, and why. The next morning, Lorna bought a ticket with some of the $87 and took the first cross-state bus east out of Reno. If this story is reaching you already, take 1 second and hit subscribe so we can keep telling stories like this one. And tell us down in the comments who is the person you misunderstood for years before you finally learned the truth about them. The bus took most of the day. It rolled east out of Reno and climbed up out of the Truckee Valley and then dropped down into a country that got emptier and wider with every mile. The towns and farther apart, Fallon, and then Frenchman, and then nothing. Nothing for a long time but the basin and range rolling by the window in long, slow waves, Brown Valley and Blue Mountain and Brown Valley again, the rhythm of the land that her father had walked across on foot behind a flock of sheep before she was ever born. Lorna watched it all through the glass with a feeling she could not name, the feeling of going toward a thing she had her whole life going away from. The bus dropped her in Austin at midday, an old silver mining town clinging to the side of a mountain, a few hundred people and 3 churches and a single main street running steep up the grade, the old stone buildings from the boom days still standing, half of them empty, the mountain wind coming straight down the street and worrying at everything that was not nailed down. She found the township office, a small brick building beside a cafe that had closed years ago, its windows soaped over from the inside. A small brass nameplate on the counter said Del McGuire, township clerk. Del McGuire herself was a woman past 60, gray hair pinned up neat, wearing a thick hand-knit cardigan over a flannel shirt, with eyes that looked at a person for a good while before they said anything, the patient, assessing look of a woman who has spent 40 years watching, who comes and who goes in a place small enough to keep track. She set a ring of keys on the counter and slid them toward Lorna, and she looked at her for that long while before she spoke. "You sure about this?" Del McGuire said. "There is no power line out there. There is a diesel generator and a well. The winters drop below zero and the nearest occupied place is 16 miles off. Your father lived out there alone for more than 30 years. He was the kind of man you could stand next to for a whole day and not hear him say 10 words. But I will tell you this much, Mrs. Aldecoa. In all this country, nobody ever called that man a man who left. They called him by a different name." Lorna picked up the keys. "What name?" she asked. Del McGuire looked at her for a long moment. "Just go on out there," she said. "You will understand it yourself. My husband Cleon will drive you, and Mrs. Aldecoa opened the office first. There is something in there your father wanted you to see." Cleon McGuire drove Lorna out in a faded green pickup that smelled of dog and hay and pipe tobacco. He was a man as quiet as his wife was watchful, and he did not try to fill the silence, which Lorna was grateful for. Highway 50 ran dead straight through the middle of the Reese River Valley. A single ribbon of asphalt laid across a sea of silver-gray sagebrush that stretched all the way to the feet of mountains that stood blue and far in every direction. And the sky over it all was so enormous and so empty that it pressed down on a person like a weight. They call this the loneliest road in America, and Lorna understood why before they had gone 5 miles. There were no fences. There were no power lines. There was no sound but the engine and the wind. In all 16 miles they did not pass a single other car. There was only the road, and the wind, and the sharp, dry medicine smell of the sagebrush coming in through the truck window, and now and then the white alkali shine of a dry lake bed off in the distance, and the crunch of gravel under the tires when Cleon finally slowed and turned off onto a cracked dirt road that ran toward the base of the western mountains. And then the wagon wheel auto court came into view. It stood there in the copper light of the late afternoon, 8 low wooden cabins arranged in a horseshoe around a gravel yard, each one with an identical door bleached pale by the desert sun. A small office at the head of the row, with a porch roof reaching out over the front of it. And rising above all of it, a tall rusted neon sign in the shape of a wagon wheel, with the words "wagon wheel" long since gone dark, and beneath them a single word in broken neon tubing. The word had once said vacancy. Now there were only a few cloudy bent tubes left, curling up toward the sky, spelling out nothing at all. The roofs of 2 of the cabins had caved in. The windows of several were broken. Weeds had pushed up through the gaps in the gravel. Cleon parked, handed her the ring of keys, and told her that he and Dell would come out and check on her in Nojedes. Then the green pickup grew small on the lonely road and was gone. And Lorna stood alone in the gravel yard with the dead motor court and the enormous silence of the desert. She stood there a long while, just looking. The wind moved through the cabin doors and made a low, long sound, like something breathing, like the whole place was asleep and dreaming and might at any moment wake. Somewhere far off, a raven called once and then was silent. The sun tilted down toward the purple mountains and poured a copper light across the bleached row of cabins, and the long shadows of the cabins reached out across the gravel toward her like fingers. This was where her father had lived for 30 years. 30 years in this one horseshoe of cabins at the foot of a mountain on the loneliest road in America. Alone while she grew up and married and cleaned 10,000 rooms in Reno and believed every single day of it that he had not wanted her. This was where he had eaten his suppers and banked his fire and grown old. This was where he had died, alone 3 weeks ago, in a room she had not yet found. Lorna felt something rise in her chest, not quite grief, not quite anger, but a strange and powerful feeling like the one you get when you walk into a room and you know that someone has only just left it, and the air is still moving where they moved, and the room is still holding the warmth of them. She had felt that 10,000 times in the hotels, walking into a room a guest had checked out of an hour before. She had never once expected to feel it standing in the open desert, in front of 8 ruined cabins, for a man she could barely remember. But she felt it. He was not gone from this place. Not yet. The place was still holding him, the way a room holds the warmth, the way a motel holds every soul that ever knocked on its door. She walked toward the office. The small sign on the door had faded, but you could still read 3 painted white letters. Office, and below it, smaller, almost worn entirely away by time, another line. Lorna had to lean in close to make it out. Always open. She put the key in the lock, it turned. Inside the office was a single, long, narrow room with a plank floor worn silver gray by decades of boots. A wooden counter ran across it, its edge rounded smooth by 30 years of hands resting on it, leaning on it, signing for rooms on it. Behind the counter, on the wall, was a wooden key rack with little hooks numbered 1 through 8, and on each hook still hung a cabin key tied to a round wooden tag with a number burned into it. A small cast-iron wood stove stood in the corner, cold now, its door hanging open, a few gray ashes still in the belly of it. A worn rocking chair sat beside the window that looked out on the road, positioned just so, at the angle a man would sit to watch the highway, to watch for headlights coming out of the dark. There was a narrow cot folded against the back wall, and a shelf of canned food, and a coffee can full of bent nails and saved string, and the sight of the coffee can stopped Lorna where she stood, because it was the same. It was the very same kind of can he had kept on the shelf in the house, in Reno. When she was a girl, a man raised poor in the mountains who throws nothing away. The air smelled of cold wood and old paper, and wood smoke, and, faintly, underneath all of it, of coffee that had soaked into the walls over the course of 30 years, until the building itself smelled like a thing that had been kept warm for a long time. Lorna walked slowly down the length of the room, her boots making a hollow sound on the plank floor. She ran her hand along the smooth edge of the counter. She looked at the key rack. 7 of the 8 hooks had keys hanging on them. Only hook number 7 was empty. She found that strange, because all 8 cabins stood equally abandoned, equally ruined, equally closed. Why were the keys to 7 of them hung up here, accounted for, put away, and the key to cabin 7 was not? She went back out the door, around the gravel yard, and walked over to cabin 7, and that was when she saw the dog. It lay on the front step of cabin 7, an old herding dog, gray and white, the fur gone silver around its muzzle, one eye clouded over white with age. As Lorna came near, it lifted its head, its ears turning toward her, but it did not bark. It only watched her with its one good eye, a calm and patient look, as though it had been waiting for someone for a very long time, and at last that someone had come. Lorna knelt down slowly and put out her hand. The dog sniffed it, then laid its heavy old head into the palm of her hand. On its worn leather collar there was a small brass tag, rubbed nearly smooth. Lorna turned it up to the copper light and read the 2 words burned into it. 7. Just that, 7. She sat down on the step beside the dog, and for the first time since the morning she had found the divorce paper on the kitchen table, she felt that she was not entirely alone in the world. The dog named Seven let out a long sigh and pressed itself against her side. It was thin, but it was not starving. Somebody had been feeding it. Lorna looked around the yard and saw a clean bowl of water set under the porch eave, and a bag of dog food standing neatly inside the open office door. Her father had been dead for 3 weeks, and yet the dog was still being fed. Someone was still caring for it. She met that someone the next morning. A young man, 18 or 19 years old, thin, with hair that had been cut badly by his own hand, walking out from the direction of the road with a bag of dog food carried on his shoulder. He stopped short when he saw Lorna, his eyes going wary as a wild animal's, ready to run. He did not say anything. And Lorna understood at once, from the way he watched her mouth so closely when she spoke, and from the way he answered with his hands, that he could not hear her. He was deaf. She spoke slowly so he could read her lips. "You feed Seven," she said. The young man nodded, still wary. He pointed at the dog, then at his own chest, then made a motion like scooping food. Lorna understood. He had been feeding the dog since the old man died. She pointed at the office, then at the young man, asking. He hesitated, then pointed back behind the row of cabins, where there was a small wooden shed. He lived there, in a shed behind cabin 8. "What is your name?" Lorna asked, mouthing it clearly. The young man hesitated a long time. Then he crouched down, and with one finger he wrote 3 letters in the dust of the step. Eli. It took Lorna many days to put Eli's story together, one piece at a time, through gestures and through words traced in the dust, and later through a small spiral notebook she bought him in Austin that the two of them passed back and forth. Eli was 18. He had been deaf since birth. He had been handed from one foster home to another his whole life, the way the unwanted are handed along, and the last one in Fallon had not been a home at all. He had run from it 2 years before, walked out along Highway 50 on a winter night, with no real plan and no real hope. Just the simple animal need to be somewhere other than where he was, and he had walked until the cold got into him, and when he collapsed at the side of the road near the wagon wheel he had believed. He wrote in the notebook that he was going to die there and that it would be all right. Yet that, dying in the open at least, was better than going back. And then a quiet old Basque man had found him in the headlights, a man who could not have heard him cry out, even if he had cried out, and had carried him in and put him in cabin 8, and never once asked him a single question. Tista had taught him how to patch a roof and split wood and maintain the generator and care for the dog. He had taught him a little of the old hand sign, the sheep herders, used across the distances of the mountains, where a man might be too far off to hear a shout. He never made the boy leave, and he never made him stay. He only left the door open. "Number 8 is yours as long as you want it," he had written for Eli on the very first night on a scrap of paper, in his slow, careful hand. And Eli had kept that scrap of paper, folded soft as cloth now, in his shirt pocket, and he showed it to Lorna, and she understood that the boy carried it the way she carried the cold ring, the way you carry the last solid proof that someone once decided you were worth keeping. Lorna watched the thin young man kneeling to feed the old dog in the early light. The boy her father had pulled out of the snow, and some things in the story of the father who had walked away, the story she had carried for 41 years, began to crack down the middle, and through the crack came a thin, hard light she was not ready for. She started to clean. It was the thing she knew how to do. She had cleaned all her life, and there was a mercy in it now, a way to be in this overwhelming place without having to feel the whole weight of it at once. You cannot clean a whole ruined motor court, but you can sweep one floor. You can wipe down one counter. You can do the next small thing, and then the next, and that is how a person crosses a distance too large to look at directly. She swept the office floor until the silver-gray planks showed clean. She wiped 30 years of dust from the counter and the windowsills. She washed the 2 tall windows until the copper evening light came through them unbroken and lay in long, warm rectangles on the floor. She opened the windows and let the dry desert wind blow through the room and carry out the smell of dust and closure. What was left underneath, when the dust smell was gone, was the smell of wood smoke and coffee, the smell of a place that had been lived in and kept warm. She found a can of coffee still sealed in the little kitchen behind the office, and a dented aluminum pot on the oil stove, blackened with use, and she brewed a pot, because the place smelled like it needed a pot of coffee, the way some rooms simply tell you what they need. She drank a cup at the window, looking out at the lonely road, the dog Seven lying at her feet with its chin on her boot, and Eli sitting on the step outside in the last of the light, and for a moment, just a moment, the bottom that she had fallen to felt less like falling and more like ground. On the fourth day, while she was wiping the dust away around the wooden key rack, her hand caught on something. The rack moved slightly on the wall. Lorna lifted it off its two hanging nails, and behind it, set into the wall, was a small concealed wooden compartment that the rack had hidden all those years. Her heart beat slow and heavy. She opened the compartment. Wait. Before I tell you what Lorna found behind that key rack, if stories like this one mean something to you, take just 1 second to hit subscribe and let us know in the comments where you are watching from. Stories about quiet kindness like this one only survive because of people like you. Now let's get back to Lorna and the compartment in the wall. Inside the compartment there were two things: a heavy leather-bound ledger, thick, its edges worn soft, and a cedar cigar box gone amber-brown with the years. Lorna lifted both out, carried them to the table by the window where the afternoon light was strongest, and sat down. The dog Seven laid its chin on her knee. She opened the ledger first. The first page, in a slow, careful, slanting hand, the hand of a man who learned English late and wrote it as carefully as he did everything else, had a heading: Wagon Wheel, Book of Number 7. And below it 1 line in English and 1 line in Basque that she could not read. The English line said, "Number 7 is never charged." She turned the page. The ledger was not a book of debts. It was not an accounting book. It was a list of human beings. Line after line, written in Tista's slow hand, was a date and a name or a description when there was no name, and a single short line about what that person had needed. Lorna read, and the more she read, the more her hands began to shake. November 1979, a truck driver, exhausted, nearly drove off the grade at the pass. Slept 2 nights in number 7, no charge. February 1981. A mother and 2 children, car dead in a snowstorm, no money. Stayed in number 7 4 nights until the car was running. Gave $20 for gas. July 1983. A young man running from something, would not say what. Stayed in number 7 a week. Patched a cabin roof to pay me back, though I told him it was not needed. Lorna turned page after page after page, hundreds of lines, hundreds of human beings, across more than 30 years. A homeless veteran wandering Highway 50, who stayed 11 days and helped Tista shear the last of the sheep, written down as Carl, sleeps badly, do not wake him sudden. A young woman running from a man who beat her, whom Tista had driven all the way to the police station in Fallon, 80 miles away, and back was 160 miles, he did not have to drive. A Mexican family traveling to find work, their car broken down, who stayed 3 nights and ate supper with him in the office. And the line beneath them read, "The little one liked the dog, gave them the old quilt." An old woman whose son had put her out, who stayed a whole winter in cabin 4, and is written into the margins again and again across 4 months, until a final line, Mrs. Pruitt went to her sister in Elko in the spring, sound and well. A boy of maybe 17 on a bicycle going to California with everything he owned in a milk crate. A man just out of the prison at Ely with nowhere to be. A pair of newlyweds whose money had run out 2 states from home. A deaf teenager named Eli, written in 2 years before, a single simple line: "The boy needs somewhere. Number 8 is his as long as he wants it." And here and there, between the entries, in a different and shakier ink, were lines Tista had gone back and added later, the way a man updates a record he keeps for love and not for money. Carl passed in 2002. The VA finally took him. He wrote me first. The girl I drove to Fallon sends a card every Christmas, 26 years now. The little one who liked the dog is a nurse in Reno. She found me, she cried. He had kept track. Across 30 years and 1,000 miles, the silent man had kept track of every single one of them, the way a shepherd keeps the count of a flock scattered across a mountain in the dark, never resting until he knows that each one is safe. And scattered through the ledger, between the entries, were short sentences Tista had written to himself like a prayer. Always keep number 7 empty. Someone always needs a door. Keep 7 open. The phrase repeated, page after page, year after year, in the slow slanting hand of a Basque sheepherder who had left his own mountains to come die alone in the Nevada desert, so that a door would always be open for the people who never made it to where they were going. Lorna set the ledger down and opened the cedar cigar box. Inside were postcards and letters, dozens of them, maybe 100, mailed back from every corner of America, spread across more than 30 years, all addressed to Mr. Aldecoa, the Wagon Wheel, Highway 50, Nevada. Lorna took one out and read it. The rough handwriting of a man. Dear Mr. Aldecoa, I am the trucker you let sleep here in 1986 when I had almost no fight left in me to keep going. I am writing to let you know I have a grandson now. I am still driving. I still remember your coffee. Thank you for keeping the light on. Another, in a woman's hand. I am the girl you drove to Fallon that winter. I have been safe for 20 years now. I named my daughter after the only thing you said to me the whole way there. That some people just need a door left open. Her name is Door. I know it sounds strange, but it is the most beautiful thing I know. Another on the back of a photograph of a small white house with a green lawn. You will not remember me. I was 17 on a bicycle, headed to California with a milk crate of everything I owned. You let me sleep 3 nights, and you fixed my back tire, and you would not let me thank you. This is my house now. I have a daughter. I leave my porch light on every single night, even when nobody is coming. Because you told me once that a light costs almost nothing and a person driving in the dark cannot always tell that. I have never forgotten it. I never will. Lorna read all the way to the last one and she had to stop and breathe. It was a postcard gone yellow, not mailed anywhere at all, set apart in a small envelope of its own. On the back in Tista's hand was a single line, written in his slow, careful English. For Lorna, my daughter, if one day you read these words. She opened the envelope. Inside was a letter. Lorna, my daughter. I know you grew up believing that I am a man who left you. Your mother needed you to believe that, and I let her, because it was the best thing I could do for the both of you. The truth is that your mother and I could not live together. I am a man of silence and wide open spaces, and she needed the things I could not give. But I never once stopped being your father. Every month for 18 years I sent money back to your mother to raise you, through the church, so that you would not know where it came from, because your mother asked me not to let you know. I agreed, because keeping a promise is also a way of loving someone, even when it breaks you to do it. I bought this old motor court when it was about to be torn down. Everyone said I was crazy, a dead motel on a road nobody travels. But I have spent my whole life on roads nobody travels, my girl, moving sheep across mountain passes where a man can freeze to death, and no one would ever know. I understand what it is to need an open door in the cold of the night. So I kept this place open. I never charged anyone for cabin 7. I kept it always for the next person who needed it. That was how I prayed, Lorna. I was never any good at talking to God, but I was good at leaving a door open. The ledger holds every one of the people who came through that door. The box holds the words they sent back. I leave it all to you, not because the motel is worth anything. It is not worth a cent, but because I wanted you to know that your father was not a man who turned his back. Your father was a man who kept a single light burning in the darkest place in America for 30 years, for people you will never meet. Now that light is yours. You do not have to keep it. But if you do, you will come to understand the one thing it took me my whole life to learn. We do not own anything in this world. We only hold the door open for one another, for as long as we are able. Keep 7 open. Your father, Bautista. Lorna laid the letter down on the table. Outside the window, the sun was going down behind the purple mountains, pouring its last copper light across the bleached row of cabins. The dog 7 sighed at her feet. Eli sat silent on the step outside, looking at the road. And Lorna Aldecoa, the 52-year-old woman who had been left behind by a husband with $87, who had believed for 41 years that her father was a man who walked away, finally wept. She wept quietly and for a long time, not from pain, but from a truth that had come too late and yet still come in time. She had misunderstood her own father for an entire lifetime, and now he was dead, but he had left her a door. She wiped her face, stood up, walked out into the fading light, and unlocked cabin 7. Inside, the room was clean and in order, a single bed made up with white sheets, a small table, an oil lamp. Ready. Always ready. For the next one, Lorna took the key to cabin 7, the one she had found hanging by itself in a drawer, and she hung it back on hook number 7 on the rack. Then she thought again, and she took it down, and she set it inside the cabin, on the table, where the next person could find it. Because cabin 7 was never locked. That was the whole point of it. The decision to stay was not one great moment. It came slowly, the way everything that truly matters comes. Not as a door you walk through, but as a road you look back on and realize you have already been walking a long time. Lorna stayed the 5th day, and then the 10th day, and then a month. And somewhere in there, the question stopped being whether she would leave and became how she would manage to stay. She fixed the caved roof of cabin 3, with Eli working beside her in silence, the two of them speaking in gestures and in the wordless understanding of people who work with their hands. passes tools back and forth without asking, each one knowing where the other was. Her back ached every night, and she soaked it in water heated on the stove and got up the next morning and worked again. And a strange thing happened, which was that the work that had used her body up in the hotels began out here to give something back, because it is one thing to wear yourself out cleaning rooms for casino that will replace you in a week, and another thing entirely to wear yourself some on own that is use gyros that you are bringing back to life with two hands. She learned the place through its seasons. She learned to maintain the diesel generator, its moods and its noises, when it needed oil and when it only needed patience. She learned the well, and the sweet cold mineral taste of the water that came up out of it, water her father had drilled for in 1971, water she did not yet know was worth a fortune. She learned which cabins held the morning sun and which held the evening, and she learned the way the light moved across the valley all day long, copper at dawn and white at noon and gold, and then violet at dusk, the mountains never the same color for an hour together. She learned the cold, the real cold, the desert cold, that comes down out of a clear black sky full of more stars than she had ever seen in her life. In Reno, the same stars her father had named for her from his shoulders when she was small. She learned to be alone, which is a thing almost no one is ever taught. And she found, to her surprise, that being alone out here was nothing at all like the loneliness she had felt for 26 years in a house with a man who had seen her. This was a fuller kind of quiet. She brewed coffee every morning on the oil stove and left a warm pot on the counter, because the place smelled like it needed a pot of coffee always warm, and because a pot of coffee on the counter is a small kindness. And a small kindness, her father had written, is sometimes the difference between a good morning and a hard one for whoever comes through the door. And little by little, people began to appear. The first was a man of about 60, driving a long-haul rig, who pulled into the yard one afternoon in a hiss of air brakes and a settling of dust, and then sat in his cab for a long while, not getting out, just looking at the row of cabins, before he finally climbed down and came into the office with his cap in his hands like a man coming into a church. He said his name was Roy. 31 years ago, he said, and then he had to stop and start again. 31 years ago, I drove my truck for a cat at the fate up there, that because I was too tired to keep my eyes open and too stubborn and too broke to stop. An old Basque fella stood right out in the middle of the road and made me stop, walked me in here, put me in number 7 for 2 nights, fed me and would not take 1 dime. And when I tried to leave the money on the counter anyway, he followed me out to the truck and put it back through the window. I have hauled freight up and down this country every year since, and every year I have meant to come back and thank him properly. And every year I found a reason not to, and now I hear he is gone. And here I am thanking a woman I never met instead, which is what a man gets for waiting. Lorna brewed him a cup of coffee on the oil stove, and they sat by the window in the long afternoon light. And she opened the ledger and turned the soft worn pages until she found the line. November 1979. A truck driver, exhausted, nearly drove off the grade at the pass. Slept 2 nights in number 7. No charge. Roy put one thick finger on the line of slow slanting ink, and he bowed his head over it and his shoulders shook, and Lorna looked away out the window to give the man his privacy, the way you do. Then came a woman named Marisol, in her 40s, who had driven all the way from Sacramento with her grown daughter in the passenger seat. She had been the mother in the snowstorm in 1981, stranded with 2 small children and no money and no way through, and the child who had been a baby in her arms that night was the woman now sitting beside her, grown and with children of her own. They stood together in cabin 7, the mother and the daughter, in the room where they had waited out the storm 40 years before, and the mother put her hand flat against the wall, as though she could feel through it the warmth of that long ago fire, and she told Lorna that they had never had money, never had much of anything, but every winter since, when the first snow came, she had told her children the story of the old man on the loneliest road who had kept them alive, so that her grandchildren now knew it too, a family's story passed down like an heirloom, a debt that could only be repaid by being remembered. Then came a man named David, who had been the young man running from something in 1983, now a carpenter with a family up in Elko, who walked the property in silence and then quietly fixed the sagging door of cabin 2 before he left, the way he had fixed a roof 40 years before, because some debts a man can only pay with his hands. Then a trucker, then another, then a woman who would only say that she had been the girl with the bruise, and who left without giving her name, but who pressed $200 in his hand for the trust and drove away before Lorna could refuse it. They came, one by one, in those weeks as though the death of Tista had sent a quiet signal out along all the roads of America, calling back every soul he had ever left a door open for. They sat in the small office, drinking coffee brewed on the oil stove, finding their names in the ledger, putting a finger on a line of slow slanting ink and going still. And they told Lorna about the father she had never truly known. She learned more about her own father in those weeks, from the mouths of strangers, than her mother had told her in 20 years. She learned that he laughed, rarely, but that he did. She learned that he could not carry a tune and sang anyway in Basque, when he thought no one could hear, which around a deaf boy was more often than he knew. She learned that he had sat up all night more times than anyone could count with people who could not sleep for fear or grief. Not talking, because he had no gift for talk, just sitting, just being a second presence in a dark room so that no one had to be alone in it. She learned, in other words, the truth, and the truth rearranged her, quietly and completely, the way the desert light rearranged the mountains every hour of the day. She came to understand that she had not inherited a motel. She had inherited a whole community of people who had been pulled out of the dark, a net of lives' eyes that one silent old man had quietly caught, one at a time, over 30 years, and never told a soul about. And she came to understand something harder. Lying awake in the cot in the back of the office, with the dog 7 breathing on the floor beside her, she understood that she had been one of them all along. That every dollar that had come through the church to raise her was a line in a ledger she had never seen. That she, too, was a person her father had kept a door open for, across a distance in silence, asking nothing, letting her believe whatever she needed to believe, only making sure month after month for 18 years that she was somewhere safe. She had been in the count the whole time. She had simply never known she was being kept. Then, one morning that month, a black SUV, polished and gleaming, turned in off the dirt road and stopped in the middle of the gravel yard, throwing up a cloud of white dust. The man who got out wore a gray suit that was far too expensive for the desert. His hair was combed and set, his sunglasses cost more than Lorna made in a week, and his smile practiced in a mirror. He introduced himself as Garrett Voss, a land acquisition agent for a development company out of Las Vegas. He shook Lorna's hand with a grip that was a little too firm, and looked around the broken-down court with an expression of pity that had been carefully arranged on his face. "Mrs. Aldecoa, I am so sorry for the loss of your father," Voss said, though it was plain he was not sorry at all. "I will get right to it, because I can tell you are a practical woman. You are sitting on a pile of rubble here, ma'am. This motel has no value. The county assessed it at $1. Am I right? $1. But my company is interested in the land. We want to put a travel plaza and a solar farm along Highway 50. I am authorized to offer you $48,000, cash, today. You sign right here, and you can walk away from this forgotten place, go back to the city, and never have to think about it again. $48,000. Lorna stood in the gravel yard with the dog 7 at her feet and Eli watching from the step. She thought of the $87 in her account. She thought of the rented room in Reno that smelled of bleach. $48,000 was a number that could change a life. But she had cleaned rooms her whole life, and she knew when a person was hiding something underneath their smile. She looked Garrett Voss in the eye, and she asked him one simple question. "If this motel is worthless, then what is it you are paying $48,000 for?" Voss's smile froze for exactly half a second, then it came back smoother than before. "For the land, ma'am, the road frontage, the paperwork, you know, the complicated things a woman in your situation should not have to worry about." Lorna told him she needed time to think. Voss left a business card and drove the black SUV away, leaving a cloud of white dust hanging in the dry desert air. That night, Lorna did not sleep. She sat in the office with her father's ledger open in front of her and the oil lamp burning low. And she thought, and the more she thought, the colder and clearer her mind became, the way it used to go clear when she walked into a room that someone had tried too hard to leave looking innocent. A man does not pay $48,000 for something worthless. A man does not drive 150 miles out the loneliest road in America in a $40,000 car to take a worthless thing off the hands of a poor woman out of kindness. There was something about this land that Voss knew, and she did not. Something his smile was built to keep her from asking about, and she had spent her whole life being the kind of woman that men like Voss assumed would never ask. The next morning she caught a ride into Austin with Cleon, the ledger and her father's letter wrapped in a clean dish towel on her lap. And she went to Del McGuire's office, and she laid them down on the counter, and she asked Del, plainly, whether she knew anything about the real value of the wagon wheel. Del McGuire put on her glasses and read the letter for a long time. When she looked up, her eyes were red. "I knew Tista 40 years, she said softly. "I knew he was a good man, but I did not know he was good like this." Then she stood, went to an old filing cabinet in the corner, and dug through it. "Mrs. Aldecoa, there is something you need to know," she said. "And if that man in the suit thinks he can outsmart you, your father got ahead of him by 17 years. Wait. Before I tell you what Del McGuire found in that filing cabinet, and why Garrett Voss was about to get the biggest shock of his life, if this story means something to you, take 1 second to hit subscribe and leave a comment telling us where you are watching from. It is people like you who keep stories like this one alive. Now, let's get back to Lorna and the secret in the filing cabinet." Del McGuire laid a thick file on the counter. "In 2009, she said, your father came into this office. He was already past 70 then, and he had started to worry about what would happen to the motel after he was gone. He knew that one day a man like that Voss would show up. So he did 2 things." She opened the file. "The first thing," she said, "is that he placed a permanent conservation easement on the land. You know what a conservation easement is. It is a legal restriction attached forever to the land itself that can never be removed, no matter how many times the property changes hands. Your father's easement says that the wagon wheel land may only be used as a place of shelter for travelers forever. No commercial travel plaza, no solar farm, no resort. Anyone who buys this land has to keep it exactly as your father kept it. A motel open for the people who need it. Garrett Voss cannot build a single thing here. He knows it. He was only counting on the fact that you did not." Lorna sat down on the chair beside the counter. "So what about the $48,000? "Ah," Del McGuire said, and a small smile crossed her face. "That is the good part. This land comes with something that in Nevada is worth more than gold. Senior water rights. Your father's well was drilled and registered in 1971, which means it has a priority claim to water older than nearly every other parcel in this entire valley. In a desert, ma'am, water is everything. That Voss man does not want your land for a solar farm. He wants the water rights. He meant to pay you $48,000 for something worth many times that, and then find a way to wriggle around the conservation easement after you had already signed. But he cannot wriggle around it. Your father bolted every door shut 17 years ago. And there is one more thing," Del McGuire said, turning to the last page. "Your father set up a trust. He named it the Cold Wells Wayfarer Trust. For 30 years he put away every spare dollar he could save, from the rent on the other cabins he let people pay, from selling off his sheep one by one. The trust is there to maintain the motel and keep Cabin 7 free forever after he was gone. You are the named trustee, Mrs. Aldecoa. As of today, the trust holds $216,418. Lorna sat very still in the small township office. The father, she had believed, was a man without a penny to his name, had quietly saved $216,000. $1 at a time over 30 years. Not for himself, not for her, but for strangers not yet born who would need an open door on the loneliest road in America. And he had built around that gift a wall of law that could not be broken, so that no Garrett Voss on earth could ever touch it. When Garrett Voss came back 3 days later, with his contract and his expensive pen, Lorna was sitting in the rocking chair in front of the office with the dog 7 at her feet. She did not get up. She just let him say his whole speech about the $48,000, about how she ought to be practical, about how a woman her age and her situation ought to know to take a last chance when it came. Then she said slowly and calmly, "Mr. Voss, you do not want my land. You want the water rights. And you know this land carries a permanent conservation easement that stops you from building anything here at all. You were counting on me being a foolish, desperate woman, and I do not blame you for that, because people have treated me like one my whole life. But my father was not a fool. My father locked this land down 17 years ago so that men like you could never get to it. So you can take your contract, get back in your car, and drive on back to the city. The wagon wheel is not for sale. It never will be." Garrett Voss's practiced smile dissolved. For just a moment the real man showed through it, the man underneath the gray suit and the mirror smile, and it was not a monster. It was something smaller and sadder than a monster. It was just a man who had learned somewhere along the way that everything has a price and everyone has a number, and who had built a whole life on that one idea, and who was now, for the first time, standing in front of a thing that did not. He opened his mouth to say something about lawyers, about courts, about how these things had a way of going against stubborn people, about pressure. But Lorna simply stood up out of the rocking chair, and the dog Seven stood up with her, slow and arthritic and unafraid. And Eli came out from behind the row of cabins, where he had been listening with his eyes, and stood beside her in silence, with a framing hammer hanging easy from one hand, not as a threat, just as a fact. 3 creatures stood there in the desert sun, a woman the world had used up and handed back, a one-eyed old dog, a deaf young man who had been passed along his whole life like a thing nobody wanted. Every one of them a creature the world had at some point valued at nothing, at $1, at less. And every one of them standing now, on the one patch of ground, in all the world where the things the world threw away were the very things that were kept. And Garrett Voss looked at the 3 of them, and at the dead neon sign, and at the ruined cabins, and at the ledger he could not see but somehow now could feel, and he understood that he had lost. Not because of the law, although the law had beaten him. He had lost because he had come to the wrong place with the wrong kind of weapon. He had brought money to a place where money had never once been the thing that mattered most, where a man had spent 30 years proving with his whole life that it was not. There was nothing here for Garrett Voss to buy, because nothing here was for sale, because the people who understood this place had understood, long before he drove up, that before both things on earth are precisely the things that cannot be bought, and that this is not a sentiment, if fact, as hard and as permanent as the conservation easement filed in the county records 17 years before. He got in his car, he drove away, and the cloud of white dust hung behind him in the dry air for a long moment, and then it settled slowly back down to the earth it had come from, and the road went back to its silence, and the silence closed over the place where he had been, as though he had never come at all. Lorna Aldecoa stayed at the wagon wheel. She used the trust carefully, just as her father had, a little at a time, never more than the place needed, because the money was not hers, not really, it was held in trust for the next one, and the one after that, and all the ones still coming down the dark road who did not know yet that there was a door. She mended the caved roofs, she reglazed the broken windows, she had the well tested and the generator overhauled. And one spring day she hired an electrician from Austin to come out and fix the rusted neon sign, the wagon wheel, and the broken word beneath it, and it cost more than she wanted to spend, and she spent it anyway, because some things are not extravagance. Some things are the whole point. The first night it lit again, Lorna stood in the gravel yard with Eli on one side of her, and the dog Seven leaning against her leg on the other, and the 3 of them watched in the gathering dark as the wagon wheel of red neon tubing flickered and caught and glowed to life, humming softly, throwing its red light out across the gravel, and then beneath it, one letter at a time, the word came up green and steady and whole. Vacancy, burning a warm green for the first time in more than 10 years. A single light, burning in the darkest and emptiest place in America, where the road runs straight for 100 miles, and a person driving alone at night can go an hour without seeing another living soul. Eli could not hear the soft hum of the neon, but he could feel it, the faint warmth of it on his face. He reached out and put his hand near the glass, and he smiled, the first full smile Lorna had ever seen on him. For the next one, Lorna thought. The light is for the next one. And she understood, standing there, that she was not keeping a sign lit. She was keeping a promise lit, a promise made by a silent man across 30 years, handed now to her, to keep or to let go dark. She kept it, the people kept coming. Some came to thank a man who was dead. Some came because they still needed a door, and the word had begun to travel. The way such words travel, quietly, hand to hand, among the people who have learned to live on the thin edge of things, that the light on Highway 50 was burning again. One winter night that year, the first hard snow of the season, sweeping sideways across the valley. A young woman with that child in a bruise blooming dark under one eye knocked on the office door at 2 a.m, driving a car nearly out of gas, running from something she would not name and did not have to. Lorna did not ask her a single question. She had learned that from a man she had spent 41 years misjudging. She just took the key. No, Cabin 7 has no key. It never has. She just led the woman and the sleeping child across the dark yard through the blowing snow to Cabin 7, where the bed was made up with white sheets and ready, always ready. The oil lamp already filled, and she lit the lamp and built up the little stove and brewed them hot coffee and warmed milk for the child, and she let them sleep. She sat up the rest of that night in the office, the way she had learned her father had once sat up, a second presence against the dark, so that no one in cabin 7 would be alone in it. In the morning, she gave the woman money for gas from the trust and directions to a safe place in Fallon and the name of a woman there who would help, and she watched the car go down the long white road until it was a small dark speck, and then nothing, swallowed by the enormous morning. And that night, after they had gone, Lorna sat at the table by the window, under the light of the oil lamp, the dog 7, sighing at her feet, and Eli asleep in his cabin across the yard. She opened her father's leather ledger. She turned to the first blank page, after the last entry in Tista's hand. She picked up the pen, and in her own slow, careful handwriting she wrote, January, a woman and a child running in the night. Stayed in number 7, no charge, sent on safe. Then below it in the line for the keeper, continuing the last line that bore the name Bautista Aldecoa, she wrote her own name, Lorna Aldecoa, and beside it, in her own hand, she wrote her father's prayer, keep 7 open. She closed the ledger and held it a moment in both hands, the leather worn soft as skin, heavy with 30 years of names, and then she set it back into the wooden compartment behind the key rack, where it had waited in the dark for 30 years for someone to come and read it. And she hung the key rack back on its 2 nails over Father's head, so that the most precious thing in the whole place stayed hidden behind the most ordinary than it was plus, which is the way of precious things. Then she went to the office door and looked out at the loneliest road in America, where the neon sign burned red and green, all by itself out across the black sea of sagebrush, visible for miles in every direction. A small light telling anyone driving through the night that here there was someone awake, here there was a door left open, here, if you could only make it this far, you did not have to be alone. She thought she heard, far off, the long low sound of a truck on the highway, downshifting for the grade, the way Roy's truck must have sounded 31 years ago, the way 100 trucks had sounded across the years, carrying tired men toward a light in the dark. She stood in the doorway and listened to it fade, and the dog 7 came and stood beside her, and listened too with its one good ear, and they kept the door open between them, the woman and the old dog, the way it had always been kept, the way it would go on being kept. That is the thing about forgotten motels along forgotten roads. A motel is a place that holds the memory of every soul who ever knocked on its door in the night. The plank floors remember the tired feet that crossed them. The cast iron stove remembers every pot of coffee ever set upon it. A motel does not stop holding these things just because the road was forgotten and the traffic went somewhere else. It holds them. It waits for the next one who needs a door. Lorna thought about her father, the Basque sheepherder, who had left his own mountains to come and keep a light burning for strangers for 30 years. She thought about her mother, who had been so frightened that she had turned one man's love into abandonment just so she could bear it. She thought about Pruett, who had left her with $87, who had counted money as more important than 26, and she understood the one thing her father had taken his whole life to learn. The thing he had tried to tell her in his letter. People do not always do the kind thing because they have stopped being afraid. Sometimes they do the cruel thing because they are still afraid. Pruett was afraid of growing old. Her mother was afraid of being alone. Gerrit Voss was afraid of a life where money could not buy peace. They were all afraid, and they had all closed the door. Her father was different. Her father had been afraid too. Surely a lonely sheepherder out in the desert has a great many things to fear. The cold and the dark and the long years and his own silence most of all. But he had chosen to leave the door open anyway. That was the only difference. It was not that he had no fear and they did. It was that he had been afraid and had opened the door regardless, every single day for 30 years, while they were afraid and had closed it. That was the only difference between them. And Lorna understood at last that this was the only difference that had ever existed between any cruel person and any kind one in the whole history of the world. Not the absence of fear, the choice you make while you are still afraid. Her father had made his choice on the loneliest road in America, alone with no one watching, no one to thank him, no one even to know, which is the only place a choice like that is ever really made. And he had made it again the next day and the next, until it was not a choice anymore but simply who he was, a man who kept the door open, a man they called, she finally understood, not the man who left, but the man who let you in. For some people, the place that has been waiting for them is a place they were born to belong. A family farm handed down through generations. A hometown they never had to leave. a trade their parents put into their hands before they were old enough to choose it. For others, and Lorna had come to believe, there were more of these than anyone admitted. It is a place they have to lose everything else before they can even find. A landing office on a river bluff, a ranger station 14 miles from the nearest road, a roadside diner up in the Ozark Hills with a lamp in the window, and a dead motor court on the loneliest road in America, where a Basque sheepherder kept a single light burning for 30 years. For the people who never made it to where they were going. The shape of it does not matter. It can be grand or it can be ruined, it can be worth a fortune or worth $1 on the county books. What matters is only this, whether you can stand inside it and look around and feel something settle in your chest, something that comes to rest there and speaking, something that says, here. This is the place that was waiting. All the years you thought you were lost, you were only on your way here. This is where I begin again. Lorna had spent 52 years believing she was the kind of person things happened to. The kind who got left, who got used up, who got handed back. And she had come, at the very bottom of all of it, with $87 and a $1 deed and nowhere else on earth to go, to the one place that turned out to have been waiting for her the whole time, kept ready, kept open by the very man she had spent her whole life believing had thrown her away. It was the great joke of her life, and it was the great mercy of it, and she had come to see that the two are very often the same thing. Lorna Aldecoa was 52 years old, and she had been left behind by a husband with $87 to her name. She inherited a motel worth exactly $1 from a father she had misunderstood for 41 years. It was the best dollar anyone ever spent. Because a legacy is not the things we own. A legacy is a ledger full of names, a box full of thank yous, a room that is never locked, and a light we keep burning in the darkest place, for the next one, the one we will never meet. Keep 7 open. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you would like to support the channel so we can keep telling quiet road stories like this one, there is a small link down in the description below. It is not required. It is not expected. It is just there for anyone who wants it. Every cup of coffee goes straight back into making the next story. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. See you on the next quiet road.